We're here at AFCA talking with Bill Parisi of Parisi Speed School. And Bill, I'm excited to have you here. I know we kind of did work in parallel with USA Football for some time, but it's good to connect here at AFCA.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Keith. Yeah, it was great to work with you at USA Football as well, and now with Catapult and at this great event. Excited to be here. You've
always been big into speed school. I've heard your name forever in speed development. I'm sure a lot of coaches have. But you're not necessarily just doing the same thing you were 20 years ago. You've always continued to evolve, and I think this has just been a natural progression that now you have sport science and analytics behind what you do too.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's interesting. Catapult's technology and what they've offered the high school market has been amazing. I've seen it firsthand. Don Bosco rolled out the Catapult devices this year, and I will say it's been really interesting because to see the volume some of those receivers were doing, it really allowed the coaches to make some important decisions, for these guys to, in conditioning time compared to what they were doing all practice, running. When they realized they were running 7-8 miles, they would back them off. So that technology has really allowed us to help make better decisions.
Sure. When you're looking at that, especially more the off season, are you still using the Catapult on them? And
not so much in the off season. On some of the running days, we're starting to get involved with it a little bit more now. Where one of the things that we like to look at is acceleration, force velocity profiles.
Yes.
We look at how an athlete accelerates, but also getting data from their top speed, and seeing how a program needs to be customized. An athlete is strength deficient. Are they more speed deficient? Are they lacking the ability, the skill to recruit that force development? So there's a lot of things we look at, and Catapult has really allowed us to take the guessing out of some things.
Right. As football coaches, we get good at moving guys through things efficiently, but that also means that everybody has to do the exact same thing. So with the data like you're just talking about here, where you see the differentiations, has that helped you more individualize or maybe put guys into smaller groups to train them?
Yeah,
especially maybe in places they're lacking.
Yeah, kind of mailboxing the athletes. Kind of steal a term from my good colleague, friend Dan Path, who's a world-renowned speed coach, but mailboxing athletes based on their strengths, their weaknesses, and typically in football they're already mailboxed for the most part. You got your skill guys, your leaner guys, and then you have your linebackers. I kind of classify athletes in a way where you look at some of your skill guys, like your DBs and your wideouts. Some of those guys are real cheetahs, right? They're kind of really lean. They're not carrying a lot of muscle. They're really tendon driven, right? They're connective tissue driven athletes.
Right.
They have a lot of speed behind them. They're neurologically really dynamic. So we classify those guys as cheetahs. We look at your linebackers, your tight ends. They're more like rhinos, right? They've got some of that quality, that speed quality, but they got more muscle to them for sure. And then you got your linemen, so more like your elephants. So they're more, just not moving at higher velocity. So we obviously mailboxing that way, but some of those bigger athletes do have some of those cheetah qualities in them. And then you got to look at, what kind of numbers are they putting out? How do they fatigue? What is their driver? And that's what's interesting, where, recently the research is showing how connective tissue has become a bigger driver in terms of us knowing that. The advancement in ultrasound equipment allows us to look at fascia, connective tissue, and that's where I've done a deeper dive in not only identifying athletes and really what their drivers are, but how do you train them? How do you train connective tissue, and how do you know when you're recovered? And that's where I think the more data you get, as long as you can understand it and know how to apply it, that can help us make decisions. And that's where I think, looking at the Catapult data, one of the biggest things I've taken away from it is the distance covered and the amount of accelerations and athletes performing throughout a football practice. I think that's really important, because if a guy's not recovered well, he's not going to be at his optimal performance, and he's going to be at high injury risk. So I really feel a big value with understanding that recovery that allows us to go back and make these decisions.
Yes. So when you're looking at that data and seeing it, working with Don Bosco, helping them get something out of that data, how does it help them tailor their practice at the high school level? To say the receivers group, like you said, so we see that, man, these guys have run a lot, and it's only Wednesday.
It's for the first time ever. The receivers, at times were taken out of conditioning, of post-practice conditioning, where a lot of the other athletes that didn't show those numbers, did their conditioning, and the receiver group was pulled out a number of times, which was a savior for these guys, because they do a lot of routes on air, they're doing 7-on-7, they're doing team, and these guys are just hauling, for 2 hours. And, the proof is in the pudding. When you look at the data, it really allowed some old school coaches, old school kind of mentality, which is great. I think it's great, but to make, these decisions, which is really a paradigm shift.
Yes.
And I feel during the season and the decisions that were made were really saved a lot of these kids in terms of them able to reach 20 miles an hour in game. We had a number of athletes go north of 20 miles an hour in game. And I feel, those are pretty good speeds at the high school level. Right. And we were allowed to do that. They were allowed to do that, or were able to do that, because practice was modified. I think if you don't modify practice, they're beat up. They're not able to be at peak performance for the game. And I think that's, again, getting the data and the interface, makes it easy to look at. I loved everything about it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important too with how you might build practice, right? I mean, you start getting the data like that, and maybe you go through a couple weeks in a row where, end of practice, you're cutting these guys. I think it helps the coach focus on, in this particular drill, it's really important that I'm working this break more than I'm working the stem. And I'm going to take that 10 yards of every rep we're doing and maybe just put a couple yards before it, right? I think it allows you to refocus, maybe what you're doing in your individual periods and even rotations. You don't want your number one guy out there taking every single rep. And, in the past, you might have seen that guys not getting very many reps in practice, and another, truthfully, getting too many.
And the other thing, too, is I think another big data point that we took away from it, you really see who's working hard and who's not. The numbers don't lie.
Right.
You look at the number of accelerations, decelerations, you look at those, you look at this data, you look at the top speeds, you're seeing who's, how often they hit a certain speed. You're seeing a lot of really critical data that can tell you who's getting after it and who's not. And I feel, Catapult's made it really simple, and it's been enlightening for me, in a lot of ways. So it's amazing the technology where it's coming. I also think it's a motivator for the young athletes too. I think it's for all the athletes, right? I mean, hey, listen, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
Right.
I'm a big believer. Evaluation equals motivation, right? Yeah. When you're getting evaluated, you're going to be fired up. It's kind of like when you're running sprints. Well, if you're doing conditioning and doing sprints with a catapult on your back, you're going to want to register some good numbers. You're going to work harder. So I feel there's a lot of those benefits that came about, and I'm excited on where this can go with that high school market and the market I address and I work with, because we never had access to data like this. It used to be just the professionals.
Right.
And now with the pricing strategies, what Catapult has done has made it very affordable for just an average kid to get Catapult for himself individually. Mm-hmm. I think it's amazing how they created these packages, and it adds a lot of value to the conditioner.
For sure. When you look at the recruiting side of this, right? I mean, a lot of the guys you're working with, especially at a school like Don Bosco, I mean, those guys are thinking about ball at the next level too. This has already become a part of recruiting, but on the high school side, how does that I guess, help the coach promote his players. We used to be out there with our stopwatches, which the college coaches, moving from the high school level to college level, we never believed them, right? So, you wanted them on your campus to run that 40, and thinking of the we lost it during the pandemic, but the one-day camp circuit, and then guys loads during that too. How many times you run a max 40 over the 10 days, right? So just a lot, I think, that shifts now, that you don't have to rely on the guy with the stopwatch or having these kids on campus, that you have data that, the technology isn't going to lie with the way these guys have it set up.
As they say, the eye in the sky doesn't lie.
Yeah.
And now there's two eyes in the sky, and it's a satellite, not just a camera.
Yeah.
It's a satellite looking at that speed and how you accelerate and, your max speed, right? You can't get more specific than looking at athletes' max speed. And to get that with pads on in a practice or game situation, it's so much better than a 40-yard dash time, right? You can really see, the volume, the levels of acceleration. You can see speed endurance. You can see how much speed endurance an athlete has. Is he still reaching high speeds later on in practice or in the game, which is great. And then you can, program accordingly. If an athlete has a high speed, but they're not hitting those high speeds later on in the game, we need more speed endurance-based training. So, I think it's a huge recruiting tool. I think if athletes have this data, and obviously if the numbers are strong, I think it can help a lot of athletes get recruited.
So you've gotten involved with this, and there's certainly a lot of information here and a lot to this, but what recommendations do you have for coaches for getting started with Catapult and this type of technology?
I really, hey, listen, to get started, I would say most importantly your skill positions, right? Your wide receivers, your running backs, your defensive backs, your safeties, maybe your linebackers. All those 7-on-7 guys, I feel that's a must. You really got to track, their volume of sprinting. That's the most important thing, because when you look at hamstrings or groins or injuries, those guys are moving a lot. And then if budget permits, then you can go down to the interior lineman. But that's where I saw the biggest value, right? Because if you're practicing, and I can't speak to a lot of different ways coaches practice, but obviously the passing game is important for most teams, and they're doing a lot of 7-on-7. They're doing team. They're doing a lot of running, and to kind of see where guys are at. And coaches aren't aware of that during practice. They're, guys are going in and out. They're substituting, right? But maybe some guys in there a lot more, and you don't notice that. But when you go look at the data, you say, wow, this guy was a lot more active than we thought. Let's give him a blow next practice, or let's pull him out of conditioning. So let's figure that out. Let's figure that out, and how that could benefit the athlete.
Sure. Yeah, you mentioned it there too. Being able to pull a guy out. We look at special teams, right, and the idea that we want starters to play on special teams. You hear that all the time. But now I think you have some good data for how many they can play on and how many of those reps they can get. It used to be like, some people would say, that guy who's begging out of the special teams reps or whatever. But now we got some information behind that as to maybe, why we may cut something back for him or however. If special teams is the priority, maybe the other reps go back. But whatever it might be, this allows you to make better decisions, informed decisions, and
you can see how hard guys are working.
Yeah.
You can see who's putting it in. You can see, when you look at these different data points, you can see how many times a guy is accelerating at a high level. How many bursts does he have in a practice? Those are really important indicators for a coach to see who's got that level of burst consistently.
Right.
So there's these three or four data points that, and that's where I feel at least at the high school market, you got to keep it simple. You keep it to three or four data points. Let's look at these. Let's track these. Let's own these all season, all practice, every game, and let's come back next year and let's continue to track data. year after year, so coaches can get more familiar. And that's where I feel the real benefit is. It's not just 1 year. Yes, you're going to get benefit from getting the data in real time, and you look at it, the next day, and you're looking at what happened practice yesterday, how a kid's doing. But then year after year, that's where coaches can get really, really educated and strategically make decisions on how to game plan practice.
Right.
That's really important. How to manage practice, because you practice the way you play, and you play the way you practice.
Yeah. For you, as training the individuals or the groups that you do, consulting the way you do, where do you see this progressing for you? How are you going to continue to develop what you're doing with this technology?
Yeah, I'm really intrigued, because getting the technology on our athletes when they're sprinting indoors, right, and looking at their top speeds, when we do a speed day. To me, that's valuable. So there's a way to leverage the technology to look at exact speeds and look what kind of volume we're getting at these higher speeds when we do a top-end speed day. That's where I feel the technology can be leveraged in the off-season, at least in the private practice. But from a football standpoint, I feel 7-on-7. There's a lot of data you can get from these guys, from their accelerations and decelerations, and even when we train, getting the data from that standpoint as well to look at volumes. And I would be able to kind of probably better answer that after a few years of data,
sure,
of actually applying it. And that's what's exciting to where we're going with this, because the cost of this technology has come down.
Sure.
It's become recently affordable, and that's how everything, 20 years ago, not everyone had a cell phone, right? Or 25 years ago, they were really, really expensive. Now, 8-year-olds have cell phones, and I feel this technology is going in the same direction.
Yes.
And the technology of the cell phones has gotten incredible. And the same thing what's happening with Catapult, with you guys being on the cutting edge and having, more teams, involved than any other technology company, and the level of teams. That's what's great. You keep advancing the technology. They keep forging forward with the data, making it simpler for the high school coaches. Is really important.
Right. And ultimately, coaches are going to get into this because it does two things for them. It helps develop their players, and ultimately it helps them win, right? They're going to be able to continue to work with kids and do the things that they love because they're winning. That's how you stay in the game, right? So I think those are all good things. For our coaches out there who want to learn more about your programs at Parisi Speed School, where can they get that info?
Yep, it's parisischool.com is our website. We run mentorships, we run certifications on speed training, we do custom development for high school teams, go in and develop, provide a speed program for the coaches. What we do is unique is we'll go in and we'll help certify and develop high school coaches so they can implement their own speed program at their school. So we have a lot of education, a lot of resources around this area. CEUs we provide, but we're an education company. And what we really want to do is educate as many coaches as we can to empower kids. So, if a coach wants us to come in and work with the kids, that's fine. But a big part of our business is educating coaches. And recently we've done a lot. We just have another book that came out, The Anatomy of Speed. We've done a lot of research in the fascia area of connective tissue and how that relates to speed and injury resiliency. So a lot of really new cutting edge information out there in the market around, this newly discovered organ in the body called the fascia system that has 10 times more of the proprioceptive muscle. So really fascinating how we've incorporated this new science into our training.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to have you on another time to talk about that because I'm definitely interested in it. I've been looking at that as well. Would love to hear what you're doing with that information, but appreciate you taking the time, sitting down with us here at AFCA.
My pleasure, Keith. Thanks for having me. All right.